All right, guys. There's been quite a few interviews, and Brian, we are live right now because I know it's hard to tell the difference on your end. But I'll tell you, there's quite a few interviews, and ever since I've talked to Brian, he's just one of those guys that just really pumps me up. He's really my kind of guy. He's got the beard. He's got everything going on. I really like what he's done. He's been on the trad side. He's been on the self-published side. He's got a lot of wonderful information. So he pops in my chats here and he's always got the best questions. And I'm like, damn, I didn't think of that, but he did. I knew he was going to come through me. So we kind of he threw me a message the other day, and I've been searching for a reason to have him back on. Of course, I just love talking to the guy. And he's like, let's talk a little about something I'm really working on at the moment: character development and world building. Development as well as a writer, and I think that's perfect. That's part of, man, I started this channel to read and learn and further my knowledge and get me and bring you guys that knowledge as well. So, man, how are you tonight, Brian D. Anderson?
I am. If I were any better, I'd be twins.
He kills it.
But yeah, hey man, I noticed you have a lot of aspiring writers that watch the channel. I pop in when I can. I'm at my computer a lot doing work, and I use it as a means of procrastination. Okay, let me get away from this for a minute. Let me go watch the show. And yeah, great guests on, and but I did notice you have a lot of aspiring writers, a lot of experienced writers as well. And so I figured maybe they could benefit from, the experience I have with world and character building. Now, before we get started on that, I do need to say that, Brandon Sanderson has a 10-part series online that's absolutely free that covers a ton of stuff. Now, understand, when you're watching Brandon or you're listening to me, Kevin J. Anderson, I don't give a damn if they're at a professional level of writing, they're not going to give you a whole bunch of different from one author to the next different information. They may give you a couple different techniques, but it's all kind of the same stuff. And but Sanderson in particular has a way of presenting the information that's easy to digest. And because you can get some guys that get real cerebral about things and put it and frame things in a way that's really hard to understand how to apply it. Sanderson doesn't do that. It's not that he's dumbing it down. He's just making it to where you can understand what he's saying and apply it to what you're trying to do. So I do highly recommend anybody watching, go watch that. Just look him up online. It's the lectures he's given at BYU. Absolutely free. They're about an hour long each, and yeah, they're fucking incredible, man.
They are. I have to say, before I started this YouTube channel, that's something that's like first on the list. Like for me, I was watching initially I was watching Daniel Green. Not so much anymore. I still respect the shit out of what he's doing.
Mike, I had Daniel Green on my YouTube channel back when I was doing some stuff like that. Yeah, I know Daniel.
Yeah, man, and he's really in touch with a lot of that stuff. He is. I mean, the dude goes to Brandon Sanderson's like underground layer type shit, and it's really cool to see. I would be lying if I said it. Like, man, I wouldn't love to do that. But one thing that you kind of touched upon is this.
Daniel does his own thing, and he's gained a lot of popularity because he has a good personality and he's worked really, really hard. And none of this comes without a lot of hard work. I think I kind of rubbed him the wrong way with a comment I made about Stephen King.
Uh-oh. What was it? What was going on?
He loves Stephen King. And I mean, Stephen King's God tier.
Sure.
But I've never really cared for his prose style. It's not that it's bad. It's just not my cup of tea. I like it when I'm not going to sit there and say the legendary Stephen King is a bad writer without sounding like a complete idiot. But I mean, it's just not it's not that I dislike it. It's just not my thing. I much prefer Sanderson's style. And I also prefer the style he adapted when he wrote the Bachman books is a different. I like that a lot better, and I think they sort of touched a nerve with him because you kind of see it in his face. I was like, ah, shit, I didn't mean to piss the guy off.
Anymore, man. It's like, is there a way to like talk with somebody and give your own opinion without pissing somebody off? It's like you kind of have to like leave that at the door. Like I respect you, Brian. Like nothing you say is going to offend me personally, man. Unless you're like, man, bald-headed people are just the ugliest people with beards. I don't like beards. You know what I mean?
You know what I'm saying? Like, who the hell am I? You know?
I would say that.
Who am I to you that would even that should even register as something that bothers you?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but at the same time, man, I highly I value what you have to say.
You might think I'm a dick because of that, and you know, I mean, and you'd be right. But
no, so I love what Brian did, man. He's been on, like I said, he's been on the traditionally published side. He's on the self-published side. In fact, he is the OG, if you will, of when the self-published world started coming out. Man, he was doing things then when people weren't doing self-published.
Back in 2010 to 2012 is when indie really started to take off and start getting noticed. And indie authors started hitting the top 100, the top 10, number one on Amazon's list. And back in those days, people, the second and third and fourth crop of writers that's come out since then, they weren't around to suffer the wrath of the Guardian and the Passive Voice and every other publication that would put out once or twice weekly articles about how we were ruining literature. And I mean, just saying the nastiest things about not just our work, but us personally. And it was, they would take personal shots at us. It was pretty rough, and there were no resources at the time. We didn't have, like, cover artists were hard to come by. Editors, I mean, you know, because I'm sorry, your high school English teacher is not an editor. An editor is an editor. So, I mean, but now you have people who are doing a lot of freelance work, former editors for like what you said at the time was Big Six, which is going to end up being the big one. So it was a really rough. It was a lot of fun. I mean, but the guys who rose to the top, like myself and like Daniel Aronson, Michael G. Manning, Bella Forrest. I mean, just this bunch of great authors. What our goal was at the time was to create a product that, when you looked at it, there was no discernible difference between that and a Big Five, Big Six at the time book, which wasn't today. That's easy as hell to do because an entire industry sprang up. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
But that's what I love about you, Brian, is you bring all that stuff to the table, man. Stuff that I'm so curious to learn about and just find out about and love. I love it. Josh Eat Books, man. He just loves the godlings.
Anderson's, Mr. Christopher D. Brand. And thank you for and thank you. I love the Godling Chronicles too. I loved her. That was my very first, and my writing has developed a lot since that time. But it was still people love that story. But Andersons and Sandersons. When I first started out, I started getting reviews saying I love Mistborn, and I didn't know who Sanderson was. You know, and so I'm like. But at the time, then when I learned who he was, you know, I was like, holy shit. When you at a glance, my name sort of looks like Brandon Sanderson. So I'm like, I didn't have the heart to tell you, I'm not Brandon, you know. But I'm thinking, hey, where's this writing thing going to take me anyway? It's not like I'll ever meet Brandon, which I have. I know Brandon. I'm actually really good friends with with one of his best friends, Mr. Dan Wells. And we've had the same. We've been published by the same publishing house, and I'm like, but even funnier, if I used my middle name, Don, it would no longer look like Brandon's name, but it would sound like it, Brian Don Anderson.
But who has that badass Harley picture, man? Every time you pop into my chat, man, I know who it is because it's like you're my long lost uncle that I never knew. That's you.
Part of mystery and mayhem, bringing fantasy to the masses, blazing a magical trail across the land.
I love it. I absolutely love it, man. That's why I love having you on. So, man, yeah.
Building.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, man, he got a hold of me, and I'd kind of been talking about having Brian back on the channel just because I love his vibe, the beard. He's just that guy for me. He's so fun to talk to. Yeah, dude, you've got it going on. You've got the gray that says I'm wise and I have a beard, and you know what? You got that hair too. Love it. So yeah, Corey, my guy, I love Michael G. Manning's books. Are you a fan yourself, Brian?
Oh, I'm not only a fan. Me and him are really good friends. I was brought him out with the Cove up to Boston last year. Me and Michael talk. Oh, we haven't talked in a little while, but we talk pretty regularly. He was one of the guys who hit the top before I did. So he was one of the guys I was looking at, aspiring to get to that level back in the early days of my career. And but Michael's not just a great talent. He's also a super cool person, very easygoing. Just one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. He loves his fans. He loves meeting the people who read his work. You know, he's a genuine person. He's somebody. If you ever get a chance to meet Michael, it's what. And the guy has sold millions of copies. Yeah, you believe it or not, he sells a lot of books. But I mean, the trad world is still dominant over indie. I mean, it still is. So,
and then you meet like freaks like Michael J. Sullivan, right? Is he purely indie?
No, well, he is now. Michael actually introduced me to my agent. I know Michael very well. I've spent the night over his house a couple times.
My favorite story of yours.
Yeah, me and him getting drunk and shooting bows and arrows on his front porch.
So good. Who else gives a story like that? That's so good, man.
Well, but Michael started out as an independent author, and then he went over to trad. Then he Michael's sort of touched off the audio rights war back about 8 years ago, and when Audible started throwing out that Bezos money just to piss off Penguin and everybody. They gave me a shit ton of money for twice in a row. Once for a series outside of my normal genre. I'm like, why? I couldn't understand why they were giving me that much money. And I won't earn out if I live to be 1,000 years old.
but that's one of those things, man, that I love to hear because like I talked to a trad author today, Mark Lawrence, who I was like, man, this guy.
Mark's to me an enigma. I mean,
he is.
He has never put out any indie work that I'm aware of.
Nope.
Or if he has, it's recent. I mean, he's not an indie guy, yet he has done so much for indie publishing that it's like, and it's like, where is that coming from?
I'll tell you, just because I just asked him, man. So I knew this coming in. I knew the answers to a lot of my questions just because I idolized the man. I was like, okay, he fell into trad publishing. This guy, he didn't have this aspiration to really be a writer, but I knew he fell into it just by the luck of the draw. Having that book right after Joe Abercrombie that kind of fell into that same, his prose is very different from Joe Abercrombie, but it falls into that grim category. And
I love Abercrombie's prose, man. He's one of my favorites. I love reading. Look, I'm sorry, and look, I know this is probably going to piss some people off, but there's parts of the First Law trilogy that are fucking boring as fuck. I mean, And I'm looking at it, I'm reading it. I mean, I read it, all 3 books. And I'm not the only author, and I'm not going to out anybody for saying this, but I read through it. I still enjoyed it because his prose was so damn good
It is.
that it made me that I didn't care that I knew he was padding for word count. I could tell. I've done that, and I knew when I see it. You're telling stories from the dog man's perspective and that the wild woman's perspective. Nobody cares about that. He's doing it's padding the runtime, which is fine. Which is Joe Abercrombie can get away with that because he was such a brilliant writer that you just don't. You just reading the stuff because he's such a great writer. And you know, I mean, I'd read it again. You know, I mean, like I said, but you know, I mean, it is kind of what it is.
So I tell you, you know, I'll tell the story again. People who watch me have heard this 1,000 times. I started reading when I was 29, found fantasy when I was 29, and I'm 33 now. One of my first trilogies was the First Law trilogy. And what I found fascinating was his ability to go from the regular, oh my God, E.L. Montague. He's my guy. He just always knows what I'm going to say. He has a way of taking me away from this serious prose to making me laugh louder than I've ever laughed. So I'm going to tell the story real quick. Slapping Fruits. So Baez comes out of the shower and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Sorry, guys. I'm going to tell it again. So Baez comes out of the shower and he's like, what the fuck's going on? And he talks about his slapping fruits because he's naked, right? And I just died. I just died. My wife wakes up and she's like, the fuck's wrong with you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. It just is what it is. He just killed me. And there's multiple times where throughout his books,
you know, I mean, and he's absolutely, like I said, and just because of his writing and his skill, I mean, there's, you know, nobody's going to be perfect 100% of the time, you know, and so, but I have yet to see any weaknesses in his prose, and I've read quite a bit of his work, and I'm like, God damn, man, if I was half that, if I was half the writer he is, you know, I mean, seriously, he's at his own level, you know, I mean, he's noticeably better than a lot of the writers out there, which not to say that, which is not casting aspersions at other writers. I mean,
no.
Once you reach, what a lot of people need to understand is once you reach a certain level of prose where you kind of cross over from that amateurish prose into professional level prose, then it's all a matter of degrees. It's like you're going into, I mean, look, I'm better than some, not as good as others, but I don't have to be any better than I am, as long as I'm good enough to tell the stories that I'm trying to tell.
Well,
and I at a professional level, so I don't have to. I would like to get better, and we're always trying to get better. But if you if you wonder if you're there or not, if you're wondering, then you're probably not there. You know what I mean?
But what I love though is this is we've kind of talked a little about some people, man, some things that we look at and kind of be critical about, and things that we love. The main reason I'm here tonight, man, and I respect you, Brian, is you came to with this wonderful idea, and it's about writing, and it's really it's kind of the reason. I've been looking for this reason to talk about writing for forever, but I'm not the guy that's like knowledgeable to talk about it. So you are.
Okay.
So,
well,
yeah.
We determined that we were going to talk about some character and world development. We'll start out with world development. Now, what a lot of people misunderstand, and this is a lot of that when you listen to the Sanderson stuff, you're going to hear a lot of what I said repeated there. So if you're wondering if I'm ripping Sanderson off, the answer to that is yes.
I think that you've had similar experiences, but man, I don't think that that's fair to say.
There are some people out there, and you know who you are. It's usually coming out of the gaming world, where who people who do a lot of gaming who decide to write fantasy or science fiction. They build this intricate world and they try to share it with the audience all at once. You can't really do that. It's called the iceberg method. You have the tip of the iceberg is what the audience sees, and everything under here is what the actual world is. And and a lot of, especially fledgling authors, people just getting into it, they feel if they don't explain everything about their world that they're going to lose their audience. You're not. All you're doing is creating questions and creating reveal moments about your world. Now, and you also get one of the what you need to decide is what aspects of your world are you going to focus on? Because you can't focus on everything. If you do, your story's going to fly apart. You're going to get bogged down, and all you're going to do throughout the whole novel is have page upon page of exposition, descriptions that nobody gives a shit about but you. And you're going to lose the reader because the story is going to get lost in the world, and that's not what you want. So if you're what you want to do is kind of divide it up. You have things about your world, like the cultures, what races, what animals, the things that are about that sort of things about your world. Then you have the topography, the geography, the do you have are you using Earth as a model for your years, your seasons? There's people who do both. I mean, obviously guys like George Martin, he has winters that last for, sometimes decades. So he's obviously not, using the same Earth model, but he is at the same time, because there are cold and warm seasons, cold and warm areas. Deserts are hot, that seems to be the same. So once you map all that out, you don't necessarily have to put that directly in the story. So the second thing you have to, once you've sort of mapped out your framework for your world, you sort of need to put your reader on what's called a learning curve. Are you going to have a steep learning curve? Are you going to have a shallow learning curve? Steep learning curve is Black Company is drops you into the world and you don't know what the fuck.
Yeah.
And then there's Harry Potter, who you learn about his world as Harry learns about it. It's a very shallow learning curve. I mean, either one is a very effective way to convey your world building into your story, because you got to understand your world building is going to impact your plot. It is going to impact how your story is told. And and especially the scope of your world building. Are you doing this on a continental scale, a country, or is your entire story told within, say, a village or a single castle, or you can tell an entire story. The mysteries do it all the time. You're sit there, the mystery, everybody's in a house together trying to figure out who done it. So, but actually, the smaller. To me, the smaller the world building gets, the more compact, the more difficult it becomes to make it interesting.
So, because real quick, just kind of throw in there real quick, one that I'm reading and who I've really found, man, I absolutely love it, and I'll kind of have you go from there. Is John Gwynne, man? I'll tell you, John Gwynne captured me with this Norse-inspired world. He captures me with these Norse-inspired names, these Norse-inspired different parts of these jobs. For instance, you've got like Drengers, and if you care enough, he comes up with these this glossary, right, and it kind of explains those different roles. And I feel that it's kind of broad, but for some reason that one stuck with me. I'm reading Hunger of the Gods at the moment. Have you dove into this world, Brian?
John's not extensively, but I know what I know that he's not. A lot of guys do what he's. Matter of fact, I'm working. I have it's a completed first book where I'm actually writing a companion book on the mythology and lore of the world. And I have to, because book one is 225 words long. I mean, which is around 700 to 800 pages on the book, and it's one of three that covers two continents. So yeah, you have to. And John writes a lot of really complex. He has his world building very complex. So what he's doing is almost necessary. And the way he distributes his information is absolutely brilliant. Now one of the things you need to understand when you are building your world is what is sort of there's some neat tricks to teaching your world to your reader, because remember, they're starting out in your world as a novice, and you're trying to bring them to expert advanced level.
Yeah.
So how quickly do you do that? How do you do that without shitloads of information dumps? How do you do that without awkward conversations, without Maiden Butler type bullshit? You know what I mean? Which is, if anybody doesn't know what Maiden Butler is, that's when they used to use this in old vaudeville acts where a maid and a butler would be talking about setting up the scene, and then the scene would happen. So you kind of knew the background of the scene before the scene, and that's a maid and butler method of exposition. So there's the Sherlock and Watson method, where you have the character who knows everything and the character who doesn't know shit. And he has to explain to the character who doesn't know shit things about what's going on. That's another way to do it. I don't really like either one of those methods. I'm actually made up an example of how you can do this and make it and integrate it into the story while creating a lot of questions and resolutions and stuff that can come later to make the way you're telling the story more interesting. So imagine there's a guy, he's laying in bed, he wakes up, he looks on his nightstand and sees this pendant that has a broken latch to it. It's all fucked up and bent up. The chain's broken. He's really pissed off about this. So he snatches it up off the counter, gets up, he goes and gets dressed, shoves it in the pocket, has a quick breakfast. As he's sitting there, all of a sudden he hears this high-pitched squeak, and he's like, and he just shakes his head, face all twisted into a scowl. Then he smells this sickly sweet odor as he's approaching his front door, and he's approaching, say, an open, cracked window. The wind wafts in, it has a sickly sweet odor. He leaves the house. So he goes down this alleyway to cut some corners, and two men who he recognizes demand his money. Well, he doesn't give it up. He just fights like a crazy person, and they beat the shit out of him, and they take his pendant and they from him. So he is beaten unconscious, wakes up in his home. There's the magistrate's there. Now his wife and his kids are with him. He's standing around, and the magistrate asks him what happened. He says, two men, he was on his way. He says, I was on my way home from getting my pendant fixed. And I had just dropped it off, and I was on my way home, and these two men I've never met before robbed me, and I don't know who they are. Now, what I've done here is I've created a shit tons of questions. What was the high-pitched squeak and the smell? Why did he not tell the magistrate that he knew those two men? What was that fucking pendant? I've created all these mysteries. Now, you find out that I don't have to answer anything right away. I can say, you find out later that the high-pitched squeak was an insect that comes around right before a winter storm comes, and so he's really not happy that happened. The sickly sweet smell, you find out, is a fungus that grows in shitty, poor parts of town. So anytime that smell comes up, you know you're in an impoverished area. Anytime that you hear that squeak, you know that there's a winter storm coming. You find out later that the pendant is in their society something that you have to buy, sell, and trade, or to even live in the city, you have to own one of these things. Somebody in the family has to have one. So he can't let it be known that he doesn't have it, which is why He didn't say who these people were because he needs to track them down and get this back before anybody finds out it's gone and get it fixed. So, but I don't answer these questions right away. I let you wonder. And the thing is, as I'm saying it, think about what you're thinking in your head. All this world building I've done it little bits at a time. And you're wondering what it is, but you don't really feel like, if you don't find out right this very second, that you're going to stop reading. So the secret is to let these mysteries linger for a little while and find a good place to answer it. But when you answer it, create something else that's a mystery. I mean, you have big reveals and small reveals that you can spread out through a book to bring the reader along into your world building. Now, you need to don't get too distracted by like things like, if you want to focus on the economics, weather patterns, things like that, food lore, that's fine. But if you go too far, like I said, it gets scattered. You focus on maybe a half dozen aspects of a world that you really have some detailed things going on. Mm-hmm. And once those are adequately explained, once you've had enough time to disseminate that information throughout the story, then you can move on to other things. And by the time when you get to the end of your story, whether it's a trilogy, a standalone book, you have not only have you avoided information dumps, but you've made the entire story this whole really cool series of tension building moments and aha moments. Holy shit, that's what that is.
Yeah.
Sanderson does it great with his first book, the Way of Kings. You're in that wagon. There's Spren, there's rock buds and all sorts of shit. You have no idea what this shit is.
Yeah.
And he's not really amped to fucking tell you. Not even in the near future do you find out what any of this shit is. You won't find out for a long time. And you know what? The story's still interesting. Actually, it's more interesting the longer you're able to hold on to these secrets, and you can drop hints along the way, what it might be, what it might not be. The longer you can draw that out, the more tension you create, the more interesting the story becomes.
I'll tell you one that comes to mind, and I grabbed it, that I'm reading currently is Forgetting Moon.
Oh, man, Brian's awesome.
Dude.
He's something else.
He is. He okay, so you open this book with this just like amazing scene. Like, okay, there's a knife in the back of this mother who's got this son, and this guy who's saving this kid. Yeah. And then okay, he fights these guys, and then okay, it jumps to the future. There's all those questions that you're talking about, right? That build that tension. Then I'm so glad you covered that, because it's one of the books I'm studying as I'm reading is Brian Lee Durfee. Yeah,
he's prison guard, right?
Yeah, dude. He's got that rawness about him, and he also creates so many questions. And I think that instead, okay, so for instance, I'll give you an example of me as I start writing as a very, very novice writer. I try to pants, and that's not working. Never will happen for me. That's not a thing for me. It never will be. I will always outline, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. One of the things I found myself doing is forgetting all of these questions that I'm trying to build in people's minds, and I forget where I was yesterday. It just doesn't become cohesive. Brian,
it's tough. It's really tough, especially if you're writing long epics and you have so much going on. It's hard to keep track of things. And continuity with long epics, especially with novice writers, people just getting into it who decide to tackle something of that length. The biggest challenge a lot of them face is avoiding continuity errors. And There's a continuity error in the Goblin Chronicles that nobody has caught
Oh,
in
wow.
12 years. There's a
So-
continuity error, two of them actually. And I stumbled across it and I went, oh fuck. And
So-
I'm like, nobody has ever caught it. And I'm like, I'm waiting for the one day when somebody catches it and calls me on it. But it's been over a decade. Nobody's caught it yet.
So as you're speaking on that, kind of will you cover a little bit, just in brief, your method of writing when you're right in the middle of that bad boy? What is your process?
First of all, when I'm starting, I always start with, I don't start with world building. I start with the plot. I start with plots and characters. It's also the reason I'm tackling the world building aspect of this first, because I honestly feel that world building, as cool as it is one of the least important parts of writing fantasy and science fiction.
Okay.
Yeah, I know people love it, especially, because you have a lot of people coming out of gaming, and they love the worlds, they love the art behind it, and seeing all that stuff. But here's something to keep in mind. Okay, one of my favorite TV programs that was a remake was the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm a big fan of that show. And the reason I'm a big fan of that show is because while it is set in space, it is not about the ships. It's not about the planets. It's about the journey and the characters that are taking the journey, and the relationship between antagonist and protagonist, and how that dynamic changes over time, and how the needs of the different people change, and how their desires and who they are grows, and what they learn and how they develop. Now, you take that same story and put it in the Old West, and it's still a cool story. So you take that same story and you put it in 1940s China, and it's still a cool story. If you have a story and you can transfer with a few minor adjustments, take the heart of that story and put it into any other genre, and it still works as a story, you probably have something special. That's why I think world building, while very important, isn't the most important thing. So you'd want to spend time developing the flora, the fauna, the religions, and the cultures, and the different races, and if you're going to do multiple races outside of humans, which I do recommend, at least to a degree. It helps you tell some stories that it helps you include some content that might be otherwise sensitive, without being ham-fisted or on the nose about it.
Now, just real quick, one that took me by surprise, guys. One that I didn't think fit into my mind as a good read. And I know you were there for the interview. One of my absolute favorite interviews, guys. Christopher Rocchio. Oh my goodness, God. Dude, this guy is one of those special. He just gave the most wonderful answers, and I get it. Like, I've read I've read the first book, Empire of Silence, and he's got humans, he's got Cielson, he's got so many other different races, and he dives into them a little bit, but he goes into a few of them really deep, and I'm so excited to get into the second book. I know I'm really new to this, but he just does it so well. The character building, the world building, it's vast, it's expanding, it's sprawling, and it kind of answers that question that you said. Like, he creates all these questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're going to find all the good professional writers. That's what that's something you either do naturally or you learn over time. Now, I mean, a lot of these skills can be learned. They're some people it comes natural. Story people. Some people have a natural understanding of story structure and how a story should be told. Some people have to learn it. You know what I mean? And but it's like anything else. You can develop it. Now, how far you can take it, that's going to be up to your individual talents. But I'll tell you a funny thing about Chris. Now, Chris is not a very tall man. He's kind of a short guy. And one of his good friends, DJ Butler, who is a brilliant writer and a
Editor,
brilliant
yeah.
person, and a brilliant person. I mean, he actually learned a Native American language like in 3 months to do a book. I'm like, oh
Yes.
shit. But I was at a con, and David's a really reserved guy, and Chris is pretty outgoing, as you gather, and so Chris is helping David sell some of his books and get people interested in his books, but you see them standing, and they're very good friends, and you see them standing next to each other, and David Butler's like 6'5".
That's me, guys.
Well,
I'm
Brad,
6'5".
I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm looking at a real life mice and men.
It's funny, man. It's
both of them are really smart.
Most of my tall friends, like growing up through school, were very reserved, okay? Because look, when we walk into a room, there's no chance you won't notice us, okay? So we're kind of like this if we're quiet. And there's still no chance.
Notice David. He's a ginormous guy. And he wears this like a Indiana Jones hat, and all the damn time. He's like a super sweet guy. I mean, just genuinely, I know I say that a lot, but I've met some really nice people, and he's one of those writers. I think that because he's written. If you read his stuff, it's absolutely brilliant.
Witchy eyes.
Everything. Well, just everything he's written is he's an absolutely brilliant writer, brilliant storyteller, but he's never really picked up the momentum that I think he deserves. I think what's going to happen is like a long time from now, he's going to be one of those writers that if you're a real fantasy writer, fantasy fan, DJ Butler. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, he's going to be one of those guys that, that he's going to, I think as time goes by and people start recognizing really just how good he actually is, that, he's writing one thing he's writing the witch books, and a man writing books about witches, I think there's a little bit of a stigma about that. That's my personal thoughts. But I was reading this stuff, I'm like, how's this guy not fucking on everybody's must read list? How is this possible?
And I love that, man, because I tell you, he was one of the guys that I always ask at the end of an interview, like, who do you recommend I speak with? And he's like, man, DJ Butler, like, he's an editor. He's got a brilliant book out. I'm talking about it a lot. Witchy Eyes, I believe, is the name of it. It's on my Kindle. It's one of those books that I'm getting ready to read. And again,
talking about. By the way, does anybody have any questions for me about world building? Anything that you're unsure of? Please put it up there. And by the way, one other thing, you are two subscriptions away from 1,000. So if you haven't subscribed, what the hell's wrong with you?
Man, I'll tell you, it's crazy. I was telling my wife, because like I was talking to Mark earlier, and I got to like 1,000 and something. And dude, I think fucking YouTube is messing with me, because they'll give me 1,000 and then they'll take like 3 or 4 back. And I'm just like, come on now. Like, what's going on here? I have a hard time believing people. Now, if that's how it is, yeah, like unsubscribe, whatever. If you don't like what I'm doing, absolutely unsubscribe. But every time I go over 1,000, it's like, I look at after an hour or two, and it's gone. So yeah, I appreciate anybody that does that. I absolutely appreciate it. Yeah. Ryan, I unsubscribed so I could be in the thousands. Man, that sounds like, dude, Ryan, man, I'm having him on Sunday, dude. He's got a sci-fi. I didn't think I was into sci-fis, and him, Christopher Bracchio, JCM Byrne, a couple guys that I've just absolutely fallen in love with as far as sci-fi. Yeah. So Corey, he's an epic fantasy writer. A guy that has a wonderful prose that I can't wait to talk with again. A guy that I've had on early in my channel that is doing wonderful things. He's redone his covers and they're so beautiful. Oh my gosh. And he's doing wonderful things. How do you go deeper in your world building reveal without feeling redundant in your method?
Well, fact of the matter is, your method is supposed to be a bit redundant. You're supposed to have a sort of a way you go about doing things. That way, you kind of can. That's kind of a way you keep track of things. Now, the way you keep it fresh and sounding fresh to the reader, which I think is what you're kind of really asking me, is and that's really not a challenge. Because you're building these things within different scenes. You can use the same method but change the scenery and it seems like something new. Think of it in terms of every story you've ever heard ever. There's nothing new. You're just retelling the same story that somebody else has told in a new, fresh way. You're just putting your own voice to it, your own spin on it. And there's nothing original about the Wheel of Time. There's nothing original about Lord of the Rings. There's nothing original. Hell, there's nothing original about The Martian. Everybody, all that is Castaway. All that, which is Robinson Crusoe, which is a number of different, but that doesn't take away from it. So what you do is basically find your method, find a way that you can do it effectively, and as the scenery changes, it may feel redundant to you, but it won't feel that way to the reader. Now, because I understand especially with prose. Because you get habits about how you're framing dialogue, how you're writing certain descriptions, and you start feeling like you're repeating yourself. It's because you're looking at it from such a close perspective. You're just too close to see clearly. You may feel like it's redundant, but the reader's probably not going to feel that way. Now, if you feel like that you have done that, I do suggest using some beta readers and make some adjustments accordingly. If they feel that way too, then yeah. But I don't. I think that would be more of a problem you're thinking exists more than actually exists. And I run across that all the time with myself, that I feel like I'm repeating myself, and then when I go back and I step away from it and I come back, I'm really not. I'm repeating myself in a very basic way, but not in a detailed way. So the same broad method and different under different circumstances, and it's going to come across as something absolutely fresh.
So one thing that I took away, guys, that are watching from Brian, the very first time I had him on the channel, was that he, again, and I've said this a couple times, he's been on both sides of publishing. And man, honestly, out of people I've talked to, it's really cool to hear him say stuff like that, because, when you're writing, for me, I'll speak personally. I feel like nothing that I do is the right way. I guess that's the way to put it. Okay, so hearing what you just said, feeling as if you're writing, you're repeating yourself. I understand that a lot, because somebody who comes up with an outline, you have this idea in your head, and you put that down. So for me, I'm going to say I have this Norse-inspired world, and again, I can relate a lot with John Gwynne. Okay, and I don't want to write a story anything close to what he's written. I don't want to plagiarize or nothing like that. But I gain a lot of inspiration.
We're all products of the stories we've read in our lived experience. That's without my writing.
So I feel like and I say the authors I speak to are, man, I really relate with that self-critical part of you. And saying, oh, what I'm doing can't be the right thing, right? Because I'm doing it. I love that you reiterate that even if you feel like you're repeating yourself, it's not on the scale that the reader will be on.
Well, the difference between would be that I've written so many books that I recognize it, and I know what's happening. So I know that I know to step away, and that it's probably nothing, you know. Whereas early on, I remember early on I would obsess over shit like that, and it was
Mm.
just not. And it was, you know, and it wasn't until later, as you go along, it's just like the experience with anything else. Then I'm realizing, okay, really, it's like my first drafts. You know, I always think they're just complete shit until I read them back. Then I'm like, oh, it isn't as bad as I thought. You know,
Yeah, and I
what?
feel like a lot of that in your mind like comes from what you're reading as well. Like, for instance, what you were saying, you feel like you're repeating yourself. I found that, for instance, what out of what you said, that hit me the hardest. So I'm going to speak personally. Um, you can reiterate yourself in a different way that makes what you're saying interesting without absolutely like repeating yourself. And I
Mhm.
think that's actually important from a
Okay,
reader
yeah.
standpoint. If I read something that's totally obtuse from what I'm used to, as far as, okay, so say I'm reading John Gwynn, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, all of a sudden he's in this African style world. It's gonna be very unfamiliar. It's not gonna be what I'm reading. It's not gonna be what I'm
Ever
into.
wondered what somebody who spoke that African clicking language who had a stutter would sound like?
That would be interesting. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think it kind of hits home with what Damien's saying. Damien Buckley, he's saying, what fundamental mistakes in world building do you see most
The
often?
two biggest mistakes that I see is the over explanation of a world to a reader, to becoming so proud of your world, and you are proud of your world, especially if you spend a lot of time building it, that you are dying to share it. And fledgling writers, new people who are new to this, often um, go way too overboard with the explanations and the descriptions, and telling about the inner workings of their world.
Mm,
Um, and which leads to the second biggest mistake I see, um, the massive um, information dumps, just this complete, just over the top. So they try to find what they usually try to do is, like, through dialogue in one spot, through another spot doing it through the narrator, then through inner dialogue, but all of it's just one big long information dump, and not doing it through the story. And that's not doing it through the telling of the story, not explaining what the locket is that I told you about earlier, through um, events that happen, rather me saying this locket is important for this reason, and because
okay.
and fear that creeps into new writers' gut, that they're going to lose their audience if they don't answer that question soon enough.
So kind of being, so what I hear is be patient with that info. If you give too much information, and I've read books like this, like
Unknown shit is your friend. It is what's going to make them turn the page. When they find out is when they close the book and take a nap. They'll keep the page. They'll keep turning the page to find out. That's not when you stop reading. You don't stop reading before the mystery's solved. You
mm,
stay up and you figure it until you find out what the hell's going on. You're not losing. You're not losing the reader. You're keeping the reader by not divulging every damn thing all at once.
I love that happy medium. I do, even at like speaking as a reader and not even like thinking about that writing side of me. Man, if I got that mystery, kind of just in the back of my mind, like, why? If you don't answer that plain black and white, and you answer it along the trend of the story, I think that's very wonderful, especially as a reader. I'm speaking as a reader right now.
No. I was thinking maybe this might be a good time to move on to some character stuff because
Absolutely.
I do want to cover some character building aspects because this is also it also plays into your plot and does play into world building. Because remember, a world is just an empty world until you populate it, and you just there's no story without the people. When I've given lectures and talks at different conventions, one of the things I ask is like, okay, tell me, what is Star Wars about? And just a couple of what is Star Wars about? And the people will say it's about Luke Skywalker. They don't say it's about the Death Star or it's about the rebellion versus the Empire. They say it's about Luke Skywalker. The Lord of the Ring is about Frodo. I mean,
absolutely.
What a story is about, it has everything to do with the characters and very little to do. That's why I say the world building takes a back seat to these things, because the story's not about the world. The story is about the people in the world. And
I'm so glad that you kind of switched to that, because we got a wonderful question. Ryan Skeffington, who I think does characters really well, says, my favorite character building frame, what would you put a person through to get the qualities that you want from them to have?
That's a not an easy question to answer.
That's a complex one.
What I will say is that I'm going to begin with this. Anybody that tells you that a character is a list of strengths and weaknesses doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, and stop listening to them immediately. That's a D&D character.
Yeah.
Are you a list of you're tall, you're whatever your talents are, but you may be not able to, you may suck at math, I don't know. Those are your strengths and weaknesses. Is that who you are?
No.
I mean, that's things that are things about you, but it's not who you are.
You've got a voice, right? You've got a tone.
Now, when you're creating a character, what you have to realize is that character is no different than any person you've ever met or even yourself. That character is a culmination of their history, their upbringing, and their biology. So imagine this. I mean, imagine this. You have two people. They are both equally afraid of heights. Say you can tell that they have an equal degree of fear of heights. Both have a paralyzing fear of heights. And they come to a rope bridge crossing a canyon. It's a rickety bridge. It's swaying in the wind. It's scary as shit. Now, one character curls up into a fetal ball and just is completely paralyzed by fear. The other character somehow manages to cross the bridge. What is different about those two characters that made one unable to conquer their fear and the other able to conquer their fear?
Bravery, willingness to overcome adversity.
Did they come from a culture that helped bring that type of courage out in themselves? Did they have a motivation that was stronger? Did they have than the other characters? Did the other character who crawl into a fetal ball have something about them that was that another event that that compounded that fear and just made the fear even worse? So when you're writing a character, you need to have some sort of bio going on. Now, writing it down is really cool, but for your but it's not necessary. But it is something you might want to do. You need to give them a history. You need to give them a past, just like everybody else has a past. You need to give them a culture to have been grown up with. Were they raised by two parents, one parent? Were they raised an orphan? How were they raised? Did they come from a a military culture like like the Spartans or some shit, or did they come from a more egalitarian culture? Did they? What was their background? What were they like as a kid? Are they tall? Were they strong naturally? Were they weak? Were they picked on? Did they have to, I mean, all these things. You want to create a character, you start there. Now,
I was just thinking of some characters. One going back to Joe Abercrombie, Logan Nine Fingers. You kind of pick up that trilogy with him. He's kind of helpless. He's helpless, but then he talks about all these friends that he has. Okay, these wonderful friends who have kind of built him up to have this brave side of him that have given him complexities, that have given him a background, that have given him a history, and in a way that you kind of I know that character. Let's explore that further rather than just I don't know, just kind of forget about him. I don't know. There's a reason that character sticks out to me. He's overcome adversities. He's overcome. He's had a hard life. He's had these battles in which he's lost a finger, and in fact, that's kind of how we remember him. Logan Nine Fingers.
Nine Fingers.
Yeah,
29.
I absolutely love that.
But at the same time, you come into that character in a place where he's trying to kind of make a change in his life in a way. He's trying not to, and he's not entirely successful. I mean,
No.
he does back to some old habits, and the same goes with several other characters. You see a fundamental change in them when they are humbled. I didn't agree with some of Joe's choices, but that doesn't make them wrong. I would have handled it different. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that's one thing when you're looking at a writer and you don't agree with the choice that doesn't make that choice wrong. That makes you would have done something different. Doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just, how do you write their ghosts without flashbacks? Well, you can actually spread that kind of information out too. Okay, imagine this. I'm sitting there and I see a dancing girl, and I'm at a tavern. I'm a warrior, mercenary, some shit like that. And I see this dusky-hued, sultry goddess doing a dance, and she's half naked, and I'm getting kind of turned on, and I start rubbing at my belly where a scar is. Now, I don't tell you right then why I'm doing that. I do say that I'm doing that, but to the reader's mind, okay, there's a scar there. He might make he's watching a dancing girl. He's rubbing the scar, and every time he gets in something similar, he rubs this scar. What you find out later is that he was stabbed by a dancing girl. There's ways to do that, but now sometimes you have to there comes a point where exposition's necessary to move the story forward. You just try to make those times few and far between, and you try to have already disseminated enough information where your exposition is very short.
I like that. Ryan says,
spread it around. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Ryan kind of an answer to that. Their actions are caused by their ghosts. I mean, we can all relate to that. Like, for instance, a past me would react to this current problem similar or completely different based on the experience my past me had with this experience. They can internally contemplate their past and choose different, or commit to the bad decision they can justify it with their past.
You can also use some turns of phrase that sort of help that along too. Say you have a guy that has a violent past and was prone to anger, and he's trying to change his ways, right? And a guy bumps into him and curses at him while on the street, and you can actually use some like an all too familiar rage swelled up in his chest that he was barely able to contain before he moved on.
Sure.
Now, but or some, I'm not saying to use that, just something along those lines, to where I've used the word that it's a familiar rage that he had to bottle up, that he had to get a handle on before he was able to move to continue walking. Now, you're using little instances to foreshadow an explanation for his past. And believe it or not, foreshadowing is a big part of how you explain somebody's story. Now, you can put them back in familiar situations, familiar places, have them meet somebody they've known in the past. There's a billion different ways to do it. I mean, I could go on indefinitely about how you do it. I mean, just the different, you got to use your own imagination how you do this.
Another way that I find very, and this is as a reader, guys. Again, this is as a reader. I am very new to the writing part of this. Okay, so as a reader, I'm reading. Okay, a morally gray character. Okay, I feel a lot of us can say we love a morally gray character. We love that guy that can say, man, I'm going to chop this guy's neck off because he did this. And for instance, if he's at a dance, okay, and this guy grabs somebody's ass and it's totally a rude gesture. And I'm a guy that kind of stands up for those morally correct situations. But then at the same time, a guy that can also stand up and say, if this guy comes in here and threatens me for doing such thing, I'm going to chop him in the neck. It's I don't know.
I think the term morally gray has been used because the world is morally gray. So people want to see what you want in a character is not moral grayness or overt goodness or overt darkness. You want moral consistency. You won't if the guy has a kind of a gray area, you need him to live in that gray area pretty much all the time, because there's no reason for him to be super duper good one moment and super duper fucked up the next.
Yes.
And for no apparent reason.
Inconsistency.
And if you're going to do that, you damn sure at some point better give a reason for it. Otherwise, that's just bad character development. You need to, if somebody's going to be morally gray, like the Bloody Nine, or you need to. That's why people had such a hard time with the way they ended Game of Thrones. You had I mean, one of the reasons, one of the many reasons. But think about Khaleesi. Or she went from zero to fucking batshit in not even an episode, in one scene.
Yeah.
She went from I'm defeating this army to I'm going to burn the entire population of this city. Her enemy was clearly in that castle over there, but she's going to burn the population first. And so,
sure.
Which was completely inconsistent with her character. And so that, if you want to know what's going to piss off a reader, being inconsistent with your characters is way the fuck high on that list. You got to, once you've established a way a character is, you need to stick with it. Now, you can grow that character, but you remember, think about your own growth through your life. I'm still the man I was when I was 20. I'm just a more mature, wiser man.
Sure.
I haven't changed so much that I'm unrecognizable from that 20-year-old. That guy's still there lurking, and he comes out from time to time. And so being consistent with your characters, once you establish a personality, you establish a history, then if you just go off the fucking rails with this, your reader's going to go, what the hell? Why would this character do that? There's no reason for the character to do that. You know,
I have to say, that's kind of a point that I wasn't totally prepared to face before this conversation. I have to bring in Stephen King. So, for instance, one of the very first fantasy books I ever read was Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Very late in the game. Yes, I know this, guys, but if you've read the book, it is consistent morally. You meet this main character, and I couldn't for the life of me tell you his name, but this boy that is morally consistent throughout the story, whether it's in the real world or this world you find yourself going to within his character. And I found, again, I did not think of that. Consistency is key. It's got to be, right? As a reader, for me.
It's got to make sense. It's even in fantasy. And I mean, that goes with world building, character building, anything. It's got to make sense. Once you've established the rules and you've established the parameters, they need to stay there, because when you start going outside of that, then you're the writer. You can do whatever the fuck you want, but you're trying to bring the reader along, and you're going to take them on a journey they don't want to go.
Yeah,
and, they're going to get off that particular train and go ride somebody else's, get on somebody else's ride, and you're going to frustrate them. They're going to see a situation, and if you put a decision that is so beyond the pale of anything that character would have ever done, you're risking number one, a bad review, and a well-earned bad review, and losing a reader. So
I'll tell you, one of the things that I've kind of captured with talking with Brian is this realistic version of being a writer. You know, I talk to a lot of writers, and I talk to a lot of authors, because there's a difference, guys. There's people who write and there's people who author a book. What I find very fascinating are these differences in the way that they tell. I mean, same thing that you find in your difference in love for George R.R. Martin or Christopher Rocchio or Stephen King or so many other wonderful authors. I love these.
Him and all in the company of all those writers.
I just love it, man. And it's one of those things that I've been after this whole entire, and I will continue to be after in this venture of mine, this journey of mine. I'm thankful for it, because I get so many different opinions. I get these based opinions, or these based facts based on like schooling or opinions or experience. And it's lovely, I'll tell you. And bibliotheory, I have to say, man, he's one of the guys.
There's no one correct way to do something. I mean, anybody says they know the right way to do it, but there is definitely wrong ways.
Sure.
There are some ways you just don't want to go about it. And, you hear, well, it's my style. It's all subjective. It is subjective, but to a point. There's objectively bad writing. There's objectively bad storytelling. It exists. How do you recognize it? Like that Supreme Court justice once says, I don't know. I can't describe porn, but I know it when I see it.
Hey, and that's absolutely what I'm talking about, man. It's one of those ways that you put things, and like I said, that's different from who I talk to. Brian is one of those guys that I'm like, all right, we're on the same wavelength. E.L. Montague. So I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's a great writer. He does dialogue, man. So good. He's what I strive to be as far as dialogue. I read his stories, his short stories. He's so good at that.
Dialogue's tricky in fantasy. There's a thing called fantasy speak that it's hard to get for some people to get a real handle on. And I find myself, when I write contemporary stuff, having to really pull back on the flowery bullshit to write contemporary, but things I can use words that I normally couldn't use in fantasy when I write contemporary. So,
Yeah.
you know, more modern speak, which is a lot of fun. He's
The
like, how do you create good personal conflict that propels the story but doesn't overwhelm it? I'm gonna answer that as interpersonal, like between two characters. You know, that's I don't know how to really answer that because it's gonna be how are you pacing the story? What through what lens are you telling the story? Um, hang on one second.
yeah.
From what
That's the
lens are you telling? Are you when you're talking about interpersonal relationships? Sometimes that is exactly what drives it. What's driving, you know, the need. Somebody's entire motivation can be wrapped up within what they desire from another character. Now, it can overwhelm the plot, and I think that's what you're asking from me. How do you keep that from overshadowing the main plot? That's a balance that's going to be so specifically determined on the type of story and how you're writing the story that there's not a really one way to answer that without me just spewing off bullshit, which I try not to do. Um, one way
respectable.
I one way okay, in the Bard's Blade, the whole entire the main plot is about you know, there's a ancient evil breaking free from its prison to conquer the world. But there are all sorts of different little plots. There's different interpersonal relationships. There's the main relationship between the two protagonists. There's relationship between one of the protagonists and her mentor. There's a relationship between the uncle and a nephew, the uncle and his boyfriend. There's all these different little relationships that's going on. And what I had to try to do was to make sure that through each time I'm dealing with their relationship, that I include something that deals with their larger mission. Um, that they are Lim and Mariah, when they finally get to be together after not knowing if they'll ever see each other again. One of the things that's upsetting them is that all the things they've had to do that are pretty fucked up. If the other one found out about it, would they still feel the same? And if you knew what I did, would you still love me? Kind of thing, you know. And
Yeah.
Liv actually is an assassin. Mariah has killed people. I mean, there's, you know, all sorts of fucked up shit going on that they don't know about because they've been separated. Now, I have what I did is I made that reconnection specifically attached to the larger story. So there was no way to separate the two. That they were back together was inexorably intertwined with the main plot. And there was no way to separate it at that point. So no matter what I did from there on with those two, the rest of the plot was dragged along with it. And without me having to worry about having two separate stories parallel to one another, that you know, that a reader might favor one over the other. They became the same story. And
It comes it comes
so
a
that
lot it comes a lot to like what it's kind of a question that I had for you, Brian. It's like, okay, so we've learned these characters' motivations. Okay, we learn kind of early on most of the time. I'll take this down. What they want to be or what they want to accomplish with themselves. And it's one of those things that you kind of grasp onto as a character based story. And again, I have to kind of get back to Joe Abercrombie.
it's a part of the plot, a part of the larger plot. That's one way to go about it. That's one way. There are other ways. I mean, you know, that's the really cool thing about the delete key. You can, if you decide what the direction you took wasn't really, didn't the end result wasn't what you were hoping it would be, you can always go back and fix it. You know what I mean? You can always do something else. It's written, well, not usually on paper anymore. It's on a screen. It's not chiseled in stone. You can, you can change it. If I ever wrote a book in both past and present tense with limited and omniscient viewpoints, no, I am not Patrick Rothfuss. I did not write Name of the Wind.
Oh, I love it, man. You took what you.
I tend to write third person, limited, omniscient. I've written a couple of shorts in first person. I don't really enjoy first person narratives as much. I like being able to tell a broader story. And the thing is, a great story can forgive a lot of mistakes. Think about Dune, one of the greatest science fiction stories ever told.
Yeah.
Drives me absolutely up the fucking walls when he does nothing but head jump all through a chapter. Everybody in the room, what they're thinking, and I'm like, from a craft standpoint, I'm like, oh, damn it.
I think one of the
most so fucking awesome. I get through it. Now this is again. I love Frank Herbert. I do. I mean, he's one of my absolute favorite writers. And Dune will be around a hell of a lot longer than my work will be. People will have forgotten my name for 100 years, and they'll still be quoting his work. So I'm not, in any way casting aspersions on Frank Herbert, but the head jumping shit drives me nuts. And which also goes to a point where you can be a talented writer and have flaws in your writing, and still be a talented writer. I mean, Tolkien, his character development's for shit.
Flowery, yeah.
I wouldn't be a writer without Tolkien. There wouldn't be fantasy as we know it without Tolkien. So I'm not getting down on Tolkien, but it is what it is. You know what I mean?
I think that you bring a very vital part to writing by saying that. So there's these storytelling parts that we hear from authors. I hear from authors that I wonder from authors, and I hear from experience. And then there's those parts that are unique to writers as well. Not every single part of this writer's or author's story will be a part of yours. Yeah, I think that you hit that point home very well. It's like, again, what I love about James Rollins, for instance, and I'll use an example. As a reader, I love to read James Rollins and his technology, what he goes to conventions for. I know this personally just because I follow him as an author. And that's going to be different from Christopher Rocchio, who kind of does his own thing and has these wonderful influences. There's going to be severing parts between different authors that they do differently, that other people love based on their personal beliefs and experience with reading or writing.
Now, when anybody, I just lit it. So
he knows he can always light up, man.
But look, when you're trying to figure out what kind of writer you want to be, especially early on, and one thing's important to remember and important to understand about yourself is why the fuck you're doing it to begin with. If you're doing this for riches and fame, you're not doing it for the right reason, and mainly because it's probably not going to happen. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but in the entire world, there are 15,000 genre novelists making a living in the world, not in the United States, in the whole of the world. That is indie and trad combined. And that's a conservative number. That's something and it's been consistent, but it's been a consistent number for a long, long time. There are more professional athletes in the United States. So if you're writing with the expectation that you are going to become a world famous author, that's perfectly cool. It's a perfectly cool ambition to have. It's a perfectly great dream to have. But if that's why you're doing it, what the hell are you doing, man? You know what I mean? You're wasting your efforts on something that that some people, if you enjoy telling a story, you should write, but you should do so without the expectations of anything other than maybe you and a couple friends ever reading it. And you should, if you're not happy with that, then you're writing for the wrong reasons.
I think that's incredible.
I mean, I have. Okay, I'm gonna. So I know we've been hitting this for a long time. So I'm gonna tell this story that's very important to me. That I don't know if I told this the last time that we were together, but I'm gonna tell it here because it's, even if I did tell it before, it's worth repeating.
Please do.
And it is why, if I never wrote another word, I would have accomplished more than I ever set out to do. And, there's a woman named Helen who I'm not gonna say her full name. She's a foster mom over in the UK, and she would take in difficult placed children on temporary basis. Then she ended up with we're going to call her Kay. Oh, actually, I can say Christy at this point. She's not a minor anymore. I can use her full first name.
Sure.
It was Christy, and she had a slight case of slightly microcephalic. She had autism. She had genetic and emotional, and she was abandoned by her parents. She had violent outbursts. She was kicked out of school after special school because of it. And so she was sent to Helen after God knows how many foster homes she'd been in. And what was supposed to be a temporary situation just kept on. And Helen's just one of those people that she doesn't give up on folks. So they just it just kept going until what was supposed to be a temporary situation turned more permanent. Now, when you are in the kind of situation this young girl is in, with the kind of challenges she faces, especially with certain degrees of autism. Now she's functional, so she's not, she's not, she can function. Sure. But the routine is very, very important. So at bedtime, she would be read the Horrid Henry stories, and she never paid attention. She would just look straight up at the ceiling until she closed her eyes when the story was over, and that would be it. Well, they went on holiday, and this was right after this the second book of the Godling Chronicles came out. So this is very early in my career. And they went on holiday and forgot the Horrid Henry books at home. Well, Helen's teenage daughter, her biological daughter, had read, because Godling Chronicles is YA fantasy, had read the first book and had it in her Kindle, and said, and told her, said, "Look, I've read this book. There's nothing in it that is, that would be not okay for her, And so, why don't you read her this?" Well, the first night didn't go well. She was unhappy. The second night wasn't any better. But when the third night hit, she a name of a character that sort of resembled her name enters the picture, and all of a sudden she perks up. She goes, "That's my name." And okay, now she started listening to the story, actually listening to the story, not just hearing the words and tone of voice. She was listening to the story. And when she got to the end of the story, wanted to hear it again. And over time, she became so enthralled with, and then book 2 came out, but so enthralled and so immersed in that world and those characters that her behavior at her school changed. She started taking because the characters, they didn't solve their problems, interpersonal problems, with violence. They would talk to one another just like adults do. I wasn't, this wasn't Hart Henry, somebody acting out. These were adults who handled things like adults. And so she started actually taking on a nurturing role in at her school, and her behavior completely changed. Now, ever so often, her parents and Helen wrote me this long letter about the journey they took, and I was in tears by the time I finished it. And so I wrote her a letter from one of the characters, and emailed it to Helen. Helen printed it up. I said, just sign it. At the bottom, and she's not going to know. Come on. So every so often she would go and visit her actual parents who, like I said, they had abandoned her. And at the end of each visit, they she would always be very upset and cry and ask, why didn't they want me? Why did they abandon me? And she would just be in tears and completely inconsolable. But this time, Helen, while they were driving out there, had put the letter. She knew what the letter was in between the seats, and says, when we get home, you can read the letter. So this whole time she's looking down at the letter. She's just dying to read this letter that I wrote her in the voice of one of the characters. So she has her visitation with her parents, and on the way home for the first time, she said, you know what? I don't need them anyway. And yeah, and read the letter, and then they just pulled over and let her read, like she couldn't wait anymore. She read the letter right then, and it was just, if I never sold another book, it was worth everything because her life was changed by Helen more so than it was me, because Helen was the one there. But to have contributed something meaningful to the life of somebody who was having such a rough time, who had never done anything to deserve the treatment that she got and the abandonment she had to face. And and to have had that kind of positive impact on a life like that, it's worth everything I've ever done, all the ups and all the downs. And so that's kind of where I kind of wanted to leave it off at that.
I have to say, man, it does not surprise me, as much as I like you, Brian, that we kind of get along in that sense, because hearing that story really touches me, because, man, I don't know any personal people to me that have that issue or that type of a diagnosis. But, man, as far as being part of a meaningful process, I don't know what else could be. It speaks a lot about you. It speaks a lot about your character, and it speaks a lot about
things over years you do. And when you hear about them, it makes it so worthwhile. There was this one young man that wrote me. He was, not the most physical guy in the world, but he wanted to be in Army intelligence. That was his goal in life, to join the Army and be an Army intelligence officer. And it was physically just unbelievably tough for this kid, because he was very, very thin, and he wrote me and thanked me, because every night when he was his muscles were so sore and he wanted to quit, instead he would took out my series Dragon Vein, and would start reading Dragon Vein, and would take him out of his head long enough to where he could go on to the next day. And he wrote me and thanked me. And I'm like, I mean, I feel, what the hell did I do? You're the one suffering. All I did was write some stupid ass story,
But it's those type of stories that really bring us together, man. And it's what I again, like I've noticed this with you in the past. You're very personal a guy. You tell your story in a way that people can understand it, and to hear this doesn't surprise me. So I want to say that, man, hearing that, it touches a part of me. I've heard a couple stories as far as me being on this YouTube thing, that touched me in that way. So I just want to thank you for kind of sharing that and talking about what you know, and kind of, a guy like me, I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to hear these amazing tips from Brian, because man, I have, I mean, you can see
You'll
it.
be passing on your own tips. You'll be on passing on your own tips before you know it.
Well, man, I hope so, because I do want to do this writing thing. I just hope that I have a similar voyage as you, guys. It's been such a cool part of my story to have Brian as one of my buddies, as far as talking to, as to talk to with tips and stuff like that. But a whole nother thing to kind of go into a story like that, man. So if there's a guy that I reach out to, man, it's going to be Brian, as far as anything really, because man, he's been on, again, I'll say it, traditional published, self-published. He's been on both sides. So Brian, thank you so much, man. This will not be the last time I have you on. I've got a couple cool ideas in store, and I hope that you like them as much as I do. Thank you guys for being here live. And for you guys that will watch in the future, I know that you will find it as valuable as I do. Just the wonderful things he has to say. Brian, thank you, man.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. So tomorrow, I will be chatting with the wonderful Crystal Matar, the Bright Wash series, guys. Yeah, it's going to be fun. She's got a lot of wonderful things to say. I know it. She's been a part of the SPFBO. She's got 2 books out that are chonkers, guys. So she's got some wonderful things to say. I know it. Tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. Brian, thank you so much. We will talk again shortly. And for you guys that were here live, thank you so much. Ryan, we'll talk on Sunday. I've got some cool things to talk about Sunday. So you guys tune in for me and Ryan's chat, because it's going to be full of some fun sci-fi. Not just sci-fi, but just writing things, period, man. He's a cool dude. So I will see you tomorrow night at 9. Brian, thank you so much.